Hello and welcome to my first 3D tutorial. This is going to start off easy. I'm going to do a nice and beginner friendly setup I did recently. I just wanted to get back into 3D work after a bit of time away. It's nice and easy, very simple setups, all the materials are very easy. It's just a nice smooth little bit of motion with some very beautiful little vases. As this is my first time doing this, if you have any advice or things I should change or go slower on or go faster on, then do let me know. And with that said, let's begin. So to start this off, we're going to add a cylinder, which is the basis of all of our objects that we're going to create. We're going to make this 110 centimeters in height and give it a radius of about 22. We're going to put this on the base just so we can get it nice and flat on the floor. We're going to go into our caps and fillet it to give it this nice rounded curves, and we'll go into our shading with lines just so we can see what it's done, and it's added this nice curvature to it. We're going to go into our object and we're going to change our height segments to about 32, which is going to allow us to do some nice curves with it later, and then we're going to add some more rotation segments as well to about 32. We've added some nice amount of geometry just so we can make sure that this object bends and deforms how we hope it would. We're going to press C, which is then going to make this editable, and go to the polygon tool and press 9 on our keyboards to get the selection tool, and then just do a nice little sweep and delete those top polygons. So now we have our final product. Thank you for watching, and I hope now we have our basic shape. This has no thickness currently. We're going to go into our viewer and do Shift C and then do thicken, which is this green one, generator. And we're going to put the cylinder inside the thicken. This thicken has now given our shape some volume, which is great, and we're going to give it a thickness of about 3. To get this shape to deform how we want it to, we're going to add a bend modifier. Now this bend modifier goes into the cylinder underneath it, and then if we fit it to parent, it's going to allow us to now, if we change the strength, we've got a little wiggly worm. If we then increase this to 90 degrees, we're going to get a really nice curve. To make it not just bend the entire shape, we're going to change the Y size, which is the vertical size, to about 55, so it only bends half of the object. And then if we just pull this up, you'll see it's going to start moving this around, and we're actually going to put it at 27.5 up, which is going to give us this really nice shape. That's just what we want to see. Glass blowing creates loads of really nice welds between two objects, and that's something I really want to recreate with these renders. To do this, we're going to add these into a volume builder, which is just here, and then we drop this thicken into the volume builder, and it's instantly going to look terrible. If we then change this voxel size, you're going to see it's going to start to make this shape into kind of what it should look like. Currently, this object has no geometry. If we then take a volume mesher, which is the empty boxes, and drop the volume builder into it, we'll get our mesh. But this mesh is absolutely enormous. Like, look how many polygons there are. To fix this, we'll go increase this voxel size to 2, and this is going to give us pretty much the shape we want, and it's going to give some pretty rough edges, which we're then going to take and smooth out. To smooth it, we're going to add a smoothing, which we then drop underneath the volume mesher. This is then going to start to kind of round out these edges, and we're still getting a bit of an issue with these edges that look a bit messy. I think I've gone too far down with the voxels, so we're going to increase it a little bit, and there we go. We've gotten a bit more of that detail back, and it's still nice and smooth and looking really good. To then smooth it out a little bit more, just to get it just how I want it, we're going to go into the smoothing deformer and then increase the iterations to about 20, which is just going to pull this front bit back a bit, but it's going to smooth it out a little bit more and make it look really nice. To add a second cup, we're going to hold Control and click and drag the thicken down. This is going to allow us to get a second object, and we're going to remove the bend, and then we're going to move it across just so we can get the edges close enough to each other. We're then going to go into our cylinder and go to the coordinates, and we're going to scale it down about half. So it's going to create a much smaller cup with a much harsher kind of edge on it, which is kind of the look I want to go for. We're then going to move this down by going into our front view and just trying to align it a bit roughly. I'm not being too precise with this, as it's not a crucial matter for me. We'll line it up just by eye and then see these inner edges, and we'll just try and line those up a bit so that we get a nice overlap between the small cup and the big one, like this. We then drag this thicken into the volume builder, and look at that. They've done a really nice merge and a blend between the cup and the vase. which is just what we want to see. To kick off our scene, we need to start and put this object on a box of some kind. So we're going to add a cube, and then we're going to go into our object, and we're just going to give it rough size. So I'm going to put it to about 580, and then we'll give it a height of about 250, because we're going to put this underneath, but we want it to be hidden by the camera, basically. We want it to just drop off the camera. And then we want to give it about 100 depth. So it will hold our object nicely, and we want to put this exactly minus half of the box's height. So now we have our object sitting on a nice little counter box. To continue this, we're then going to put some walls up, because walls make our scene look like a room. We're going to add a plane to our scene. We're then going to rotate it by pressing R and then Shift and up just to give it all these coordinates. And then we move it back. We then want to scale it up like this and up. So we have a nice, really basic scene with our vase and a wall and a box. To then make this a bit more interesting, we're going to add some side walls. To do this, we're going to add another plane, and then we're going to rotate it this way. So we're going to create this kind of other wall here with a window that sits here. We'll move this towards the end of the box. So we're now going to scale this wall a bit. So we're going to make it a bit smaller this way, and then we're going to make it about 100. So it sits just along this wall, and then we're going to move this up just so it sits as a wall blocking light coming through here. In my scene, I had this about 115 centimeters away, which is just enough to give it that kind of nice, like you see it in the shot. Next, we're going to create our window. So we're going to put a plane down, and then we're going to rotate it up and then around, move it in line with our other wall, and then we're going to pull it across, and we're going to scale it a bit. So this plane, we want it to be about 350 centimeters across and about 625 up. This isn't very realistic scales, and because this is a kind of abstract piece, I'm not so fussy on actual real scales. This is just kind of what I work to while making it. This isn't good practice if you're trying to do simulations, which is not something I was doing for this project, but in future do mind that if you are doing things to scale, then make sure they are to scale and not 6-meter windows. We're going to turn this into a window now with an atom array, where you drop this plane into it, and it's going to create a bunch of grid likes that we're going to give 5 radius to the spheres and 5 to the cylinders, which is going to give us a bunch of bars. But the reason there are so many is that the way this atom array works is it does it per line and per edge of the shape and per vertice. So if we don't want it to have this many bars, we're going to drop this down to about 2. We're actually going to put this atom array to about 3 width segments on your plane, which then changes your atom array to make a nice little window like this that we're then going to use to cast all of our sunlight through onto our shape. We're going to add a quick ceiling by just making a plane, dragging it up, moving our window down a bit just so it's in line, and then we'll scale up our plane. Now we have a very, very basic scene. I'm going to add a couple more details just to block out some more light. We are going to copy our plane that we have here, and we're going to move it across. We're then going to scale it up both ways, and then we're going to drop it next to the other side of the window. Now this isn't very scale accurate, it's just purely here to act as a light block for when all the sunlight comes in, so it doesn't cast lots of light here as well. We want it to be nice and confined and just have enough light coming onto here. This is now our scene built. Very, very simply, we have our vase and then we have our scene. So I'm going to select all of our scene objects and press Alt G, and we're just going to call this scene, and we're going to call this one vase 1. So if you want to create more, you can obviously create as many as you want using this technique and then run them along splines and things like that, which is what I ended up doing for a final piece. And I'll show a couple more tricks that you can do later on to create some more interesting patterns and shapes. We're now going to set up our camera, which is one of the most important parts. I'm using Redshift, which we're going to use by just clicking the camera. It's going to create an RS camera. We're going to give it a focal length of 80, which is nice and tight, and it just means that it kind of makes everything a bit flatter, but then also gives a kind of look that I really like. We're going to move this around a little bit. This is pretty close to me, but we're going to change a couple of things now that are going to lock it off a little bit more. So we're going to go into our render settings up here, and we're going to change this output to 1280 by 1280. This is going to then zoom us out a bit, and we're just going to go in a little bit more like this, just so we get a nice kind of tight view of our vase. I am happy with this camera placement. We've got it in a square, which is just basically Instagram format. And we're going to create a nice bit of lighting now and so a couple materials just to really make this scene pop. Before we go any further, and we've got our camera set up properly, we're going to go into right click on your RS camera, go to rigging tags and add protection. This means now if we try and move our camera, we're not going to be able to, which is something that I have messed up many, many times in the past, and it's a nice way to just kind of make sure it's just locked off. Locked off. We're going to open up our Redshift render view, and we're going to bring it to the side here, press play, and you'll see our scene looks incredibly boring and nothing like how I hoped it would. To make it look better, we're going to add an RS sun and sky rig, and then we're going to start to play with these coordinates that then change how the sun then comes into our scene. To help see where the sun is actually pointing, we're going to go into panel, arrangement, 2 views stacked, and then in here, we want to change our camera to perspective. The display to then quick shading, which is then going to allow us to control around the scene while also seeing where our locked camera is positioned. Now we've done this, we can go to our default camera, we'll go out, and now we can see exactly where the sun is in the sky compared to our scene. If we then want to play with these settings a bit, and you'll see that it's starting to now create the kind of look that we want. If we now continue to play with this, we'll start to get a bit more of the kind of look that we had before. As you can see, we've got a pretty nice bit of light here. I'm really liking the way it casts the shadows on the wall. I'm really liking how this is looking. It's a bit too tinted for my liking, but we're going to fix that in a moment. First, we'll add an RS dome light, which is then going to make the scene incredibly bright, and we're going to add an HDRI to it. This is going to add a bit more reflections when we start to add materials, and it's going to start to make our scene feel a bit better. I've got one already decided that I'm going to add, which is the Brown Photo Studio from Polyhaven. Once you've added this, you'll see that your scene then starts to kind of gain a bit more color back. This is a bit too much for me, and it's too orange based on the scene. Firstly though, I am going to rotate the HDRI I've got to match where the windows are, just so that we've got the right kind of light coming through our window in our scene as well. This is looking nice, but we're going to go to our HDRI and saturate it a bit first. 50 sounds about right. It's mostly to get some ambient lighting and some nice reflections when we start to add a glass material to this object. Another thing that is currently not sitting quite right with me is this is just too grid-like and doesn't fit the kind of natural feel I want the vases to have. To fix this, we're going to add a tree. And luckily, without having Forester, Cinema 4D has some lovely built-in assets. If we then search for black locust, number 2 is the one I used, which is this tree. We can then zoom out a bit and drag this tree object into our scene. This tree we can then use to actually cast some more shadow in our lovely scene. And we're going to just pull it and push it next to our house, just so it's going to cast some nice shadows with the light coming in just over here. So we're going to get some more kind of foliage look, which is going to look really nice and break up a bit of that light. It's going to give us a bit more kind of drama and a nicer kind of feel and look to our lighting that's coming in. To give this a bit of motion, to make the leaves blow in the wind a bit, we're going to add a wind. This will then go onto our young fall full, and this is then going to start to make our tree move like crazy. However, you're not going to be able to see it. If we turn our render view off and look at our tree, it's now, with this wind, going to start going crazy. Now this is a bit too much for my liking, and it's not going to give it the kind of look and natural feel that I'm hoping for. To change this, we're then going to change the amplitude, which is going to scale it back a bit. We're going to keep the size as is, and we're going to change the frequency. We're then also going to increase the turbulence to about 100%, which means it's all going to be a bit rougher and it's going to target more of the leaves. And then we're going to turn flag off. This is going to make our tree move nice and smoothly, and if you want to increase the frame range a bit, and we'll put it to 400 for now, you'll see this tree is then slowly blowing in the wind, and it's just going to cause some nice shadows on our scene. We'll put this back to our proxy, which is just the kind of geometry holder, and then now we can start on the materials. To start off, we're actually going to create our background materials, as the glass is the last thing I want to tackle before I show you a couple of other tricks to make some nice vases. We're going to go and open our material viewer, and this black logo just created a bunch of materials, and we're actually going to delete unused materials. This tree actually only uses about 6 of the materials there. It has a couple versions, but I'm not fussed about those right now. We're going to create a new material and open it up. This is your material menu, and in here, it then allows us to start creating some new things. To create our wall materials, we're going to press C and then go max on noise. This max on noise is then going to dictate all of the displacement and a little bit of bumpiness that we're going to give to our walls and boxes. We're going to change the type to FBM. We're going to up the octaves to about 7.5. and we're going to decrease the gain to about 0.4, just to give it a little bit more detail. We're going to change this scale as well to about 200, just to make it so it's a bit more scaled over the object, and it will give us the look we want. We're going to add a ramp and then plug our maximum noise into this alt input of our ramp. Before continuing, add our material onto our wall object so we can actually see what we're doing now. We're going to add it onto here, here, and here. Great. You can see all the reflections now, and this is what's going to start getting picked up on our glass, which is great. It's just what we want. We're then going to go into here, and we're gonna go onto our ramp, and we're going to go with one side at black, and we're going to take this one and bring it down to about 25% grey. Should look like this, and if we press S, you're going to start to see how this noise then sits on the surfaces, and this is going to be how the kind of shapes are bumped up. We actually want to push this a bit further down to about 20%, I think. Now we've seen how the noise is sitting, we're going to press C, and we're going to add a displacement. We're going to put the out color into the texture and then drag it onto this output displacement. We're then going to turn the viewer off, and you'll see in an instant that it's started to add this kind of like rough texture to the walls and such, which is great, and it's just what we want. Now we want to change the color of this material. In our base properties of our RS material, we're going to go and change the color. Now we don't want it to be plain white, we want to give it a little bit of yellow just to give our walls some more color. This now has some nice displacement, but it's still a bit too reflective for my liking. So in our reflection roughness, we're just going to push this up to about 0.6. Now this is looking more like it. There are a few things that we need to fix though. These objects with the displacement wall material on actually also need Redshift tags. To do this, we go add RS object, go to geometry, override, and then displacement. This is now then going to push these materials out a bit and give us the look we want. If we hold control and just drag it down to the next objects, this is then starting to get this nice kind of pattern that we want. Then to continue this, we're going to create our glass material now, which is the kind of core item to this whole project. For this next glass material, we're going to create a material standard, which works slightly differently to the basic material. If we add this to our object and then go into it, we'll see all of these nice reflections that we're getting from our outside lighting and also the HDRI we put on. We're going to go in and remove the weight of our base color, which is going to turn it to this black shiny material, which is totally fine. We're then going to give it full roughness, and then in our transmission is where we're then going to start to add our color. To give it the kind of roughness that we want, we're going to add our full weight of our transmission, which is then going to turn this into a glass object, and we're going to give it some extra roughness. If you increase this extra roughness, you'll see this object then starts to become frosted. Firstly, we're going to work on some color though. We're going to add a ramp, and then we're going to go and drag this into this gray area, and in transmission, we're going to put it into color. This now has created the effect of our color. And now you can play with whatever colors you'd like. What I had before was a kind of green, a bit like this, that was going into a yellow. We'll go from green to white on this. Our roughness is a bit too high for my liking still, so we're going to try and add some textures in a moment, just to really bring this kind of colors out. But as you can see, we've really started to get this kind of vase look with the nice lighting and the reflections coming through. To continue this, we're going to need some textures. And while this object doesn't have the best UVs, it works well with some textures and it follows the curves how I like. For this project, I used just a roughness map I downloaded from Megascans. These Megascans images are really great and they're a really quick way to get some really nice textures. This is the texture I had, which is just nice fingerprints and markings, and we're going to play a little bit with the colors on it just to make it not so rough. To do this, we're going to add a ramp and plug our roughness into the alt input, and then we're going to go into here and we're going to change some of the settings. We're going to push our white level down to make it a bit rougher, and then we're going to make this about 50% white. Now we've got this kind of roughness that we like more. I'm going to drag this up into our base transmission extra roughness, and this is then going to start to give our shape this nice roughness that I like a lot, and it's got some nice details that I think really come through. You can't see them much until you render it, sadly, but it does add a lot of texture and a lot of... We're going to pull some of these levels up, and you'll see the more you pull them up, the more rough the object gets. So we're going to play with these settings a little bit just to see if we like the shape that we're getting. I think this looks really nice, but the final touch to making these vases in the caustics. Now caustics are not a thing you want to try doing on a bad PC. However, they do add a lot to your scene, and they really give it those really lovely reflections on the walls. To do this, we're going to go to our vase, right click, render tags, and then RS object. We're then going to go into our visibility and override, and then we're going to turn on casts caustic photons. Now, this hasn't done anything yet, and the reason is because our sun isn't casting any photons. Now, to add these caustics, we're going to go into our RS sun, we'll go to details, turn on caustic photons, which is then going to start to cast them, and then we're going to increase this number to about 10 million. This does drastically increase your render time. However, it will start to cast some really nice bits of light once you get kind of brighter spots coming through this object. We're going to do a couple more things to fix up this scene a little bit. Firstly, this cube also has too harsh of an edge, so we're going to fillet it, and then we're going to turn the radius down to about 0.2. This is just to give it a bit of a smoother edge, and so it's not super harsh, kind of unrealistic edge. We're going to add a portal light. We're going to move this portal light, rotate it, and then align it with our window. As you can see, it's now going to sit like our window pane, and we're going to increase the scale of it till it covers our whole window. This portal light is going to allow us to increase the amount of light coming through. This portal light is actually then going to brighten up our scene, which is just what we want. We're going to change the intensity a little bit and the exposure. So if we take this down, you'll see it's going to get a bit darker, and if we take this up, the scene's going to get a lot lighter. We'll leave it at about 1 for now, and it's creating a nice kind of amount of light, which is just what we want, and it's staying nice and bright with all the shadows and things. If we then put this on bucket mode, we should start to then see these caustics come through, which is just what we want, and that's how we're going to finally render this project. That's it for this part 1. We're not going to push it any further than this for now. We're going to tackle animation and the final render settings in the next part. I'm going to put it in a second part because I think separating the easing and all the timings and pacing that we're going to give the video is something that deserves its own section. I'm also going to talk about how to turn objects on and off so you can keep your scene running and one render all at once rather than doing 4 separate shots. And I want to go a bit further into how to make the caustics come out and how to not tank your render. If you enjoyed this, please do let me know. I'll release the next part soon, and if you do like it, I'm going to do the classic YouTuber thing and ask you to like and subscribe. I will be posting more. I've really enjoyed making this tutorial so far, and when I make some new cool things, I'll be sure to let you know.